My husband had spent 3 painstaking years planning a divorce that would leave me with nothing, but sitting at our anniversary dinner, he had no idea I held the proof right in my hand. Holding a silver fountain pen that was not mine over a legal document that erased 15 years of my existence, I realized that the man I loved had been plotting my execution in broad daylight. The high-end steakhouse private dining room was filled with the warm glow of crystal chandeliers, the clinking of champagne flutes, and the quiet laughter of 20 of our closest friends and business associates who had gathered to celebrate our 15th wedding anniversary. Julian sat right beside me, his tailored navy suit pristine, his arm resting lightly around my shoulders as he leaned in to whisper that he loved me more today than the afternoon we met in law school. Yet, hidden beneath the leather dinner folder resting on my lap was a confidential court summons and a fraudulent post-nuptial agreement bearing my forged signature, assigning 90% of our marital estate and the deeds to my late father's logistics firm to a shell company in the Cayman Islands. He didn't know that I had swapped the folders 2 minutes before the waiter brought out the dessert, replacing his carefully hidden filing documents with the original blue ink copy he thought was safely locked in his office safe. Across the table, his stunning 30-year-old junior partner, Victoria, raised her glass toward us with a smile that almost looked sincere, completely unaware that the transfer paper she had signed as the sole director of that offshore firm was currently sitting right under my fingers. When Julian's phone buzzed on the tablecloth with an urgent notification from his bank, his confident grin froze, and the color drained from his face as he met my eyes. He thought he was 5 minutes away from serving me with divorce papers that would leave me destitute on our anniversary night, but he was about to discover that the trap he spent 3 years building had just closed on him instead. When Julian and I bought our brownstone in Boston 12 years ago, we painted the library walls dark blue and promised that no secret would ever enter that room. We were young, ambitious, and convinced that our partnership was unbreakable. I had poured my entire inheritance into his fledgling wealth management firm, providing the seed capital that allowed him to secure his first high-net-worth clients, while I stepped back from my own career to manage the operations, the family accounts, and eventually the estate of my late father. For years, I believed we were building a future together, brick by brick, dollar by dollar. Our routine was comfortable and predictable, or so I thought. Every morning at precisely 6:30, Julian would leave for his downtown office, polished and impeccably turned out, while I handled the oversight of Sterling Logistics, the family transport business my father had built from the ground up and entrusted to me. Julian had offered to manage the corporate restructuring of the company 3 years ago, when my father passed away, claiming it would save us hundreds of thousands in capital gains tax and streamline our family assets under one umbrella. I trusted him implicitly, signing the financial reorganization ledgers and legal filings he brought home after long days at the firm, never questioning why certain corporate entities were established in Delaware rather than Massachusetts. The first subtle crack in our seamless reality appeared 8 months ago during a routine tax audit prepared by our longtime accountant, Arthur Pendleton. Arthur called my personal line while Julian was on a business trip to Chicago, casually asking about a series of monthly wire transfers totaling nearly $400,000, originating from the primary operational fund of Sterling Logistics. The recipient was an entity called Apex Advisory LLC. When I mentioned this to Julian upon his return, he gently laughed it off, wrapping his arms around my waist and explaining that Apex was simply a tax-sheltered reinvestment vehicle designed to protect my father's legacy from volatile market shifts. His explanation was smooth, affectionate, and supported by a stack of printed spreadsheets that looked entirely legitimate. I wanted to believe him, so I pushed the lingering knot in my stomach aside and blamed my own overactive imagination. Yet small inconsistencies continued to accumulate, like dust in forgotten corners. Julian began locking his home office door whenever he stepped away to grab a glass of water, something he had never done in 15 years of marriage. His phone, which used to lie casually on the kitchen counter, was now constantly face down, guarded with a newly updated facial recognition passcode. Then came the evening I found a receipt from a high-end jeweler in Newbury Street, tucked into the pocket of his dry cleaning bag, for a vintage diamond pendant that I had never seen and certainly never received for my birthday or any holiday. When I gently asked him about the receipt, Julian did not hesitate for a single second. He pulled me into a warm embrace, looked straight into my eyes, and told me that the pendant was a secret anniversary gift he had purchased early to avoid losing it to another collector, claiming it was currently being kept in the jeweler's vault until our party at the steakhouse. His voice was laced with such convincing tenderness that I felt an immediate wave of shame for doubting him. But the following afternoon, while waiting in the lobby of his office building to drop off his forgotten passport before a conference, I saw Victoria Vance walk through the glass doors. Suspended around her neck was the exact platinum chain and filigree diamond pendant from the receipt. She smiled at the receptionist, her demeanor cool, poised, and utterly at home in the executive suite. Victoria had joined Julian's firm 2 years prior as a junior partner specializing in offshore asset management, and Julian had repeatedly praised her sharp analytical mind during our dinners. Seeing the necklace on her chest felt like a physical blow, yet I forced myself to remain completely still behind the decorative marble pillar near the elevators. I did not cause a scene, nor did I confront Julian when he came home that night with a bottle of my favorite Pinot Noir. Instead, I waited until he was asleep, his rhythmic breathing filling the master bedroom, and stepped quietly downstairs into the dark library. I sat at his mahogany desk, my hands trembling slightly as I stared at the locked lower drawer where he kept his personal safe. The key, I knew, was attached to the spare brass ring he kept inside his leather golf bag in the garage. My heart hammered against my ribs as I retrieved the key, unlocked the drawer, and pulled out a thick binder stamped with the crest of a legal firm in the Cayman Islands. As I turned the crisp pages under the faint light of the desk lamp, the blood in my veins turned to ice. The documents revealed a meticulously constructed financial labyrinth that had been actively operating for 36 months. Sterling Logistics had not been restructured to protect my inheritance. Its liquid assets, physical fleet, and real estate titles had been systematically funneled into Apex Advisory, LLC, where Victoria Vance was listed as the sole managing director. Furthermore, tucked into the back flap of the binder was a draft for an immediate petition for divorce, accompanied by a forged postnuptial agreement dated 2 years ago that surrendered all my rights to our marital home, our joint investment accounts, and the entirety of my family business in exchange for a meager lump sum settlement. Julian had not simply fallen out of love. He had engineered a cold, calculated financial execution designed to strip me of every dollar my father had earned, leaving me penniless while transferring our life's work to his mistress. The divorce papers were scheduled to be served directly to me at the end of our 15th anniversary celebration, turning what should have been a night of honor into a public humiliation carefully structured to catch me without legal defense. Looking at the signatures forged in my name with terrifying precision, I realized the gentle, devoted husband I had cherished for 15 years did not exist. Sitting alone in the dark room, holding the evidence of his betrayal, I made a silent vow that I would not shed a single tear, nor would I give him the satisfaction of a panicked confrontation. If Julian wanted a masterclass in legal and financial strategy, I was going to give him one he would never survive. For 3 days I moved through our home like a ghost, maintaining the domestic facade while every nerve in my body was wired for war. I made his morning coffee, straightened his silk ties, and listened to him talk animatedly about the seating arrangements for our upcoming anniversary dinner at the steakhouse. Every touch of his hand felt like cold iron against my skin, but I forced my expression to remain serene, soft, and entirely unsuspecting. He was so confident in his elaborate trap that he mistook my quietness for complete submission. Behind that quiet exterior, I was operating with clinical precision. Instead of confronting Julian, I bypassed our local family attorney and quietly retained Arthur Pendleton's former senior mentor, a ruthless forensic accountant and veteran matrimonial lawyer named Marcus Vance. No relation to Victoria, though the irony was not lost on me. In a soundproof office overlooking the Boston Harbor, I laid out the contents of the Cayman Islands binder. Marcus examined the paper trail with a grim, practiced eye, tracing the intricate web of wire transfers, shell corporations, and property title modifications. Marcus pointed out a critical detail Julian had overlooked in his arrogance. To legally validate the offshore transfer of Sterling Logistics assets into Apex Advisory LLC, the corporate charter required a final physical sign-off from the primary shareholder, me, or a certified original copy of the post-nuptial agreement, bearing a live, blue ink signature submitted directly to the escrow bank. Julian had forged my signature on the court copy, assuming I would be too stunned and broken on the night of our anniversary to contest the document before the 30-day filing window closed. He had stored the single original blue ink forgery in the wall, safe behind the oil painting in his private office downtown, intending to hand it over to his legal team the morning after the party. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe to Betrayed, the Revenge channel. A simple like helps more people discover these stories, and your support inspires us to create new ones. Now, let's continue. To dismantle his plan, I needed that original document and absolute proof of Victoria's active co-conspiracy in the bank fraud. Over the next 48 hours, I used my legitimate access as a registered corporate officer of Sterling Logistics to request certified digital audit trails from our master bank accounts. What I uncovered was far more sinister than simple embezzlement. Julian had not just diverted corporate profits. He had taken out 3 separate high-interest commercial loans against the physical real estate of the logistics warehouses, totaling $6 million, and routed the funds through a secondary firm registered in Nevada before landing them in Victoria's private offshore account. The night before our anniversary, while Julian was supposedly at a late client dinner, I used his spare electronic key fob to enter his downtown office suite. The building was dead silent, the shadows stretching long across the polished marble floors. My heart hammered against my ribs as I walked behind his massive mahogany desk, swung open the hidden wall safe behind the painting, and pulled out the original blue ink post-nuptial agreement. My fingers brushed over the forged signature, a precise, cold imitation of my handwriting. Alongside the agreement, I discovered a secondary file containing a draft of a press release Victoria's public relations team had prepared, detailing my sudden resignation from Sterling Logistics due to emotional instability following my father's passing. They weren't just taking my money. They were preparing to destroy my sanity and reputation in the eyes of the Boston business community to ensure no one would take my eventual claims seriously. I didn't destroy the forged post-nuptial agreement. Doing so would have alerted Julian immediately and allowed his legal team to pivot to another tactic. Instead, I photographed every single page using a high-resolution document scanner, uploaded the encrypted files directly to Marcus Vance's secure server, and carefully replaced the blue ink original with a high-grade color replica I had printed hours earlier. But I made one crucial modification. On the financial schedule attached to the back of the agreement, I subtly altered the account numbers for the primary escrow disbursement fund, swapping the Cayman account details with those of an frozen, court-monitored escrow account Marcus had set up that very afternoon. When I stepped out of the office building into the cool rain, the full picture was crystal clear. Julian thought he was walking into our anniversary dinner as the triumphant architect of my financial ruin, flanked by his young mistress and surrounded by our influential peers. He believed that by the time the dessert plates were cleared, I would be legally stripped of my father's legacy, publicly humiliated, and presented with a forced settlement that barred me from contesting his actions. As I climbed into my car, staring at the blurred neon lights through the rain-streaked windshield, a cold sense of clarity settled deep in my chest. He had spent 3 years meticulously building a legal cage for me, measuring every angle, calculating every weakness, and counting on my love and trust to keep me blind. But he had forgotten one fundamental truth. I was my father's daughter, and I knew how to run an empire just as well as he did. The dinner tomorrow night was no longer a celebration of our marriage, nor was it his execution of my life. It was going to be the arena where every single piece of his deception was exposed under the blinding light of truth. The night of our 15th anniversary arrived with a crisp autumn breeze that swept across the Boston harbor. I stood in front of the full-length mirror in our dressing room, wearing a striking emerald green silk gown, a dress Julian had always claimed was his absolute favorite because it made me look effortlessly regal. I smoothed the fabric over my hips, adjusted my mother's vintage pearl earrings, and checked my clutch one last time. Inside was not lipstick or compact powder, but an encrypted flash drive containing the entire forensic audit, certified bank records, and high-resolution scans of the forged signatures, alongside a thick leather dining folder, identical to the one Julian was currently slipping into his inner jacket pocket. Julian came up behind me, resting his hands lightly on my shoulders and pressing a tender kiss to the side of my neck. He smelled of expensive cologne and dark whiskey. Looking at our reflection in the mirror, anyone would have seen a picture-perfect, wealthy couple at the height of their lives. "You look magnificent, my love," he murmured softly, his voice rich with that familiar warm tone that had fooled me for 15 years. "Tonight is going to be unforgettable. I've arranged everything perfectly." "It certainly will be, Julian," I replied, meeting his gaze in the mirror with a calm, sweet smile that required every ounce of my willpower. "You have no idea how much effort I know you've put into tonight." The private dining room at the steakhouse was breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm amber glow over the long mahogany table set for 20 guests. High-profile attorneys, corporate board members, city officials, and long-term family friends were already sipping vintage champagne when we arrived. Sitting prominently at the middle of the table, looking radiant in a white sleeveless dress, was Victoria Vance. When she saw us walk in, her eyes flicked to Julian with a brief, possessive spark before settling on me with a look of quiet, triumphant pity. She thought she was watching a lamb walk willingly into the slaughterhouse. As the waiter poured the first-course wine, Julian took the head of the table, raising his glass to toast our marriage. He spoke passionately about loyalty, devotion, and the incredible journey we had shared since our young days in law school. He publicly praised my devotion to my father during his final days and spoke movingly of how proud he was to manage our shared estate. The guests clinked their glasses, nodding with admiration at the devoted husband before them. Across the table, Victoria raised her glass directly to me, her lips curling into a subtly mock smile. Throughout the 3-course meal, I played my role to perfection. I smiled, laughed at the old stories, and gently held Julian's hand above the tablecloth, feeling the cold platinum of his wedding band against my knuckles. Beneath the table, however, my fingers were resting on my leather folder. When the dessert plates were cleared and the waiters quietly retreated to the back of the room, Julian cleared his throat, pushing his chair back slightly. The room fell silent as everyone turned to face him. He reached inside his suit jacket, pulling out his dark leather folder, placing it flat on the mahogany table right beside his silver fountain pen. "Friends," Julian began, his voice taking on a heavy, solemn weight that immediately drew everyone's undivided attention. "Before we end this wonderful evening, there is a painful matter of personal honesty and corporate integrity that I am forced to address publicly. Over the past year, despite my deepest efforts to preserve our union, Eleanor has been struggling with severe emotional volatility and financial misjudgment following her father's passing. For the protection of Sterling Logistics and our joint responsibilities, we have reached a mutual agreement to separate and dissolve our legal partnership. A collective gasp echoed across the private room. Several guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while Victoria leaned back, folding her arms with a look of cold, calculating satisfaction. Julian smoothly opened his folder, sliding the forged postnuptial agreement across the table toward me, alongside his silver fountain pen. Eleanor has already executed the primary agreements, he continued smoothly, looking directly at the city officials and board members. Tonight, in front of our trusted community, she is signing the final release of corporate management for Sterling Logistics over to Apex Advisory, led by Victoria Vance, ensuring the company's survival while Eleanor steps back to focus on her health and recovery. He looked down at me with a practiced look of sorrowful compassion, pushing the pen into my right hand. "Sign the blue copy, Eleanor," he whispered softly, his voice low enough for only me to hear, but firm as steel. "Let's make this clean and quiet for everyone." I looked down at the paper. The blue ink signature at the bottom looked uncannily like mine, but the schedules attached beneath it were the modified documents I had swapped into his safe 24 hours earlier. I picked up the silver fountain pen, feeling its weight in my fingers, and looked up at the room. "Julian is right about one thing," I declared, my voice echoing clearly across the silent dining room, cutting through the shock like a surgical blade. "Tonight is about absolute transparency, legal integrity, and the future of my father's legacy. But there seems to be a minor misunderstanding regarding who is signing what." Before Julian could react, I reached into my lap and placed my identical leather folder directly over his. I opened it wide, revealing not a surrender of my assets, but certified copies of the bank statements, the court summons Marcus Vance had filed 2 hours prior, and the forensic document examiner's report proving that the signature on Julian's postnuptial document was a masterfully forged copy executed by a paid technician in New York. Julian's hand froze on the tablecloth. "What are you doing, Eleanor?" "Sit down. This is absurd." I turned to Victoria, whose face had suddenly drained of all color. "Victoria, as the sole director of Apex Advisory LLC, I am sure you are familiar with the $6 million in illegal commercial mortgages taken against Sterling Logistics' primary warehouses over the last 18 months, I said, my tone completely calm, steady, and loud enough for every board member at the table to hear. "You might be interested to know that 3 hours ago, the Massachusetts Attorney General's Financial Crimes Unit was presented with the full wire transfer log showing those funds moving directly into your personal account in the Cayman Islands." Victoria gasped, dropping her champagne flute. The heavy glass shattered against the mahogany floor, spraying sparkling wine across her white dress, but no one looked at her. All eyes were locked on Julian. His face turned an ashen gray. He grabbed his phone off the table, his fingers trembling wildly as he tried to open his banking app, only for a red notification to flash across his screen. "Account frozen by federal court order." "That is impossible," Julian stammered, his polished composure shattering completely as he stared at me in horror. You couldn't have. You thought you spent 3 years building a cage for me, Julian," I said softly, standing up from the table and pulling my silk shawl over my shoulders. "But you forgot that while you were busy forging my name, I was busy running my father's business. Every single document you signed tonight transferred the liability of those fraudulent loans exclusively to your personal name and Apex Advisory, while Sterling Logistics' actual titles remained completely protected under my sole ownership." The dining room erupted into chaotic murmurs as 2 plainclothes officers, accompanied by my attorney Marcus Vance, walked calmly through the double doors of the private dining room. Julian sat paralyzed in his chair, staring at the silver pen still resting in my hand, realizing that his grand public execution had turned into his own total destruction. The heavy wooden doors of the private dining room swung open wider, allowing the low hum of the steakhouse lounge to bleed into the suffocating silence of our table. Marcus Vance stepped into the room with an unhurried, measured stride, carrying a leather briefcase that matched my own. Beside him, 2 officers from the Boston Police Department's Financial Crimes Division stood impassively, their dark uniforms casting a stark, uncompromising shadow over the room's opulent decor. "What is the meaning of this?" Julian demanded, rising abruptly from his chair, though his voice lacked its usual commanding resonance. His knuckles were white where he pressed them against the table to steady his trembling frame. "Marcus, this is a private family gathering. Whatever wild fabrications my wife has fed you, you have no right to disrupt this dinner." Marcus did not flinch. He produced a crisp, blue-stamped court order from his folder and laid it precisely beside Julian's untouched dessert plate. "Mr. Sterling, I am serving you with a temporary restraining order, an emergency asset freeze issued by the Superior Court, and a formal summons regarding multiple counts of grand larceny, corporate forgery, and bank fraud," Marcus said, his voice completely level, echoing off the mahogany walls. "Simultaneously, a formal complaint has been filed with the Board of Bar Overseers detailing your systematic attempt to misappropriate your client and spouse's inherited assets through offshore shell entities." Victoria bolted upright, her chair scraping violently against the floorboards. "This is ridiculous. I am a senior partner at an accredited wealth management firm. I have nothing to do with Julian's personal marital disputes. Miss Vance," Marcus turned his cool gaze toward her, "pull up your personal mobile banking application right now if you wish, but you will find that the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation and the State Prosecutor's Office have frozen account number ending in 4892 in the Cayman Islands. The $400,000 monthly transfers, originating from Sterling Logistics Capital Reserves, have been flagged as proceeds of criminal fraud. You are named as a primary co-conspirator." Victoria's hand flew to her mouth. She looked down at her lap, her eyes wide with terror, then turned a glare of pure venom toward Julian. "You told me she was clueless," she spat, her refined composure dissolving into raw panic. "You swore to me she signed those papers months ago. You said she didn't even understand the corporate tax filings. Julian didn't answer her. He couldn't." His eyes were glued to the tablet Marcus had placed on the table, which displayed a live high-definition video feeds of federal agents executing a search warrant at his downtown office suite at that very second. They were systematically boxing his hard drives, filing cabinets, and the private wall safe behind the oil painting. Every eyes around the table was fixed on Julian. Our longtime friends, corporate partners, and city officials sat in stunned silence, their expressions shifting from confusion to disgust as the reality of his 3-year betrayal laid open before them. Arthur Pendleton, our old family accountant, slowly shook his head in bitter disappointment, sliding his chair back as if sitting next to Julian was physically unbearable. "You thought I was weak, didn't you, Julian?" I said softly, stepping closer to him, looking down into the eyes of the man I had trusted with my life for 15 years. "You mistook my patience for ignorance. You thought because I grieved my father, because I let you handle the heavy legal paperwork, that I had stopped paying attention. You thought I would sit here, listen to you paint me as mentally unstable in front of everyone we know, and sign away my father's legacy just to avoid a public scene." "Eleanor?" "Please," Julian stammered, his confident facade completely shattered, his breath coming in short, shallow, ragged gasps. "We can talk about this in private. We can fix this. You don't know what you're doing. This will ruin everything we've built. We didn't build this, Julian. My father built Sterling Logistics. I built our home. You built a lie," I replied, my voice steady, sharp, and entirely devoid of heat or malice. "And tonight, your lie has reached its end." The lead police officer stepped forward, tapping Julian lightly on the shoulder. "Mr. Sterling, Miss Vance, You both need to come with us to the precinct for formal questioning regarding the fraudulent filings and illegal loan originations. Please step away from the table." Victoria began to sob hysterically, clutching her designer handbag as the second officer escorted her toward the exit, her white dress ruined by the dark red wine stain. Julian stood frozen, looking around the room at the cold, unforgiving faces of the people whose respect he had cultivated for decades. Not a single person spoke up in his defense. Not a single friend reached out a hand. As the officers guided Julian toward the door, he turned back to look at me one last time, his eyes pleading, desperate, and broken. I didn't yell. I didn't throw my drink in his face. I simply stood straight, holding my chin high, wearing the emerald green dress he loved, and watched him get led out of the private room in handcuffs under the soft amber light of the chandeliers. The fallout from that autumn evening hit Boston's elite financial district like a tidal wave. Within 48 hours, news of Julian's public arrest and Victoria's immediate suspension from the firm swept through every major law office and corporate boardroom in the city. The ironclad evidence Marcus Vance and I had gathered, the meticulous forensic signature analysis, the certified bank wire trails, and the testimonies of the mortgage officers Julian had duped, left the district attorney with an undeniable, rock-solid case. Faced with federal wire fraud, grand larceny, and corporate forgery charges, Julian's slick legal defense team dissolved before a trial date could even be scheduled. Rather than face a publicized jury trial that carried a guaranteed decades-long state prison sentence, Julian took a plea deal that stripped him bare. Under the terms of the final divorce decree and criminal restitution order, he surrendered every single claim to our marital assets. The blue-walled brownstone, our joint investment portfolios, and every stock option he possessed were legally transferred into my name alone. Furthermore, his personal liquid holdings were seized to satisfy the $6 million in fraudulent commercial mortgages he had taken against Sterling Logistics, fully clearing my father's warehouses of all debt without a single cent, leaving my corporate accounts. In the end, Julian was sentenced to 48 months in a federal facility, while Victoria received 3 years of strict probation, heavy financial restitution, and the permanent revocation of her corporate license. 4 months after the final divorce decree was stamped by the judge, I stood alone in the library of the brownstone. The cool spring sunlight streamed through the tall glass windows, illuminating the dark blue paint we had chosen together so many years ago. I hired a team of painters that morning, sitting quietly with a warm cup of coffee as they systematically rolled crisp, luminous white paint over those dark blue walls, physically erasing the heavy atmosphere of a home built on years of calculated deceit. I officially assumed the role of Chief Executive Officer at Sterling Logistics. The morning I walked onto the floor of our central distribution terminal, listening to the powerful rhythm of the freight engines and greeting the dedicated men and women my father had treated like family, I felt a deep, unwavering peace settle into my soul. I had not just saved my father's life work from destruction. I had reclaimed my own competence, my own leadership, and my own absolute independence. Looking back, my true victory was never the sight of Julian being led away in handcuffs, nor was it the financial ruin of the people who sought to destroy me. My victory was the quiet realization that his betrayal no longer held power over my heart. I had endured the ultimate deceit from the person I trusted most, survived the fire of his greed, and emerged stronger, wiser, and entirely unshakable. I walked out of the shadows of a fabricated life and into a future that belonged entirely to me. Thanks for watching. Like, comment, and subscribe to Betrayed, the Revenge channel. New video coming soon.